Hi, and welcome back to the Healthy and Happy podcast. We haven't done an episode for quite a while. We've been working on some other exciting things in C.O.R.E and Healthy and Happy that we're getting ready to launch, and so that's taken a lot of our effort here lately. But we're getting back on the horse, as it were, and picking back up with some of the stuff. And I am joined today with a good friend of mine, Andres and I, and I've known Andres for a long time, and we are. So, you want to introduce yourself? Right.
I guess I don't know what else to say. My name's Andresa, and I'm a wife and a mom. I've got 2 little girls and a little boy on the way, due in just a couple of months. And I get to work with Denim as the office manager for TMS, which is super cool. And I really love that whole aspect of mental health combined with brain health. And yes, excited to be here to chat.
Yeah, one of the things that we've got launching just in the next little bit here is our C.O.R.E Healthy and Happy portal, which is a resource with a plethora of information on each of the 7 healthy and happy principles and skills and tools and worksheets and a community to be a part of. And we've been spending a lot of time working with it. And Andresa was doing a lot of work on the editing of that and the materials that we pulled together. And the 7th healthy and happy principle is on healthy sexuality. And one of the things that she was pointing out is that we were missing some important aspects of healthy and happy sexuality that we have part of our healthy and happy program that we didn't necessarily have represented well in the portal. And so we decided to do a podcast today on healthy sexuality. And in particular, we're going to talk a little bit about healthy sexuality and C.O.R.E and how temperament and personality affects this very important aspect of a relationship. And so to start with, it's really important to understand that the sexual domain of a relationship is a super important one. It is and for various reasons. One of the things that every one of us has 2 primary needs. The first one is to feel like we matter, that we matter and that we're valued and valuable, that we're wanted by the important people in our lives. And the second need is that we feel emotionally safe with them. And there's lots of research that's been done that helps us understand the things that need to be going on in a relationship in order for those needs to be healthfully met. And one of those things that in the daily routine, one of the things that helps us feel that way is what is referred to in the literature as passionate love. And passionate love is defined as you are uniquely special to me, and I am uniquely special to you. And so it's not just about like romantic love is part of passionate love, but it's you bring a special sauce into my life, a special something that I don't get from anybody else. I can't just unplug Andresa and plug in Susie and have it be the same. No, Andresa is uniquely important. And when we feel that, then it helps us feel like we matter to that person. And so sexuality is one of those things that ought to be unique to our primary attachment relationship. And that therefore when we healthfully share that domain with somebody, and only that somebody, it helps us feel uniquely important and valued by that person. And the second reason that this is super important from an attachment perspective is that primary attachment relationship is also our only healthy source for some really important things in life. And sex is certainly one of those things. That primary attachment relationship is our healthy source for sexual connection. And when it's not going well there in that primary attachment relationship, it messes with our feeling that we do matter to the people that we should matter to that person that we should matter to. And it also messes with our ability to feel really safe with them. Make sense?
Yes.
Thoughts?
Um, yes. I don't know that I've ever thought about it in that specific way until going through the modules, realizing this is a way of getting those emotional needs met, like feeling like you are safe and that you matter. I just, it naturally goes with it, but I'd never thought about that's really what it is. And when that's not going well, you're not going to feel like you're safe or like you matter, which I think happens more frequently than any of us want to realize,
Right.
which is a
Yes.
pity.
Really good point. This sexuality is one of the areas where a huge percentage of couples struggle to have this domain of their lives and relationships going well. And it's unfortunate because it is totally possible to have this area of your life and relationship go super well. And when it is going well, it feeds those needs of feeling like we matter and that we're safe really well. I I have lots of people that talk to us and come to see me who struggle with this domain of in their lives and wondering what to do to um, improve or make this area of your life work.
Why do you think that is? Like, why is sexuality such a difficult thing for most couples when it's so normal, the most natural thing in the world? It's part of marriage, part of creating a family. Why is this a struggle?
Why do you think?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that for a second. I think,
I can talk about it, then you can respond if you want.
yeah, it can work. I mean, I think for me, it's something because it's everybody's got their own journey, right? Like you probably don't just there are very few things in life that you just start out knowing how to do well. But I think a lot of it for me was lack of education and knowing where to go and it being so hidden. I didn't know where to go. And so I had to navigate first I had to navigate where to go and then I had to navigate all the stuff that I found and then I had to apply all of that.
Right.
But that was just
Well,
me.
and with your temperament, you're more likely to do that legwork to figure it
Right,
out.
seek out info.
Yeah, and you hit on a couple of important things there. One is that like any aspect of our lives, this uh, being I don't know how to say that being being good at having sex um, is a skill just like anything else, and and it's one of the things that I see over and over and over with people is I don't I mean I'm obviously a little biased here, but I don't know that there are very many things in life that are more important than having your family relationships go well. And we make people study and take tests to learn how to drive. We make people go to school to learn how to do math or English or to write. And we don't expect somebody to just know how to do algebra because they're a human or because they were raised by parents who knew how to do algebra. We don't expect somebody to know how to drive a car just because they've ridden in a car their whole lives. But when it comes to these most important things, we treat them as if we're just supposed to know.
Totally.
You're supposed to know how to resolve conflict well. You're supposed to know how to parent. You're supposed to know how to communicate well. You're supposed to know how to have sex well with no training, with no education, and certainly we're not going to talk about it.
Right.
In fact, I have to tell a funny story. So I have this series of healthy and happy classes, and years ago when I was teaching one of those classes, my brother and his wife and my parents were both in the class. And after we finished the module on healthy sexuality, my dad said, "I would just like to." And so I was probably at this time, I don't know, I was probably 45 or something. I don't know, 40, early 40s, somewhere around there. My brother was in his late 40s, and my dad said, "I would just like to say that I'm glad that I finally had this talk with my boys." and and that's not an uncommon occurrence.
Right.
In fact, and let's just clarify, he hadn't had the talk with his boys. I had the talk with him and my brother. But that's not an uncommon occurrence. Most of us don't weren't raised in a home life where these things were talked about well and openly. And the irony there is that if we're not talking about it, and if we're not teaching our children and socializing our children, then who do we think is doing that? Because just like you said, so if you want to know how to have sex more effectively, you got to be really careful Googling that online, right?
Right.
You're going to be exposed to a lot of things that you probably don't want to be exposed
Right.
to. And so this is an area where it's difficult to find information that you can trust, and find, this is also an area where there's a lot of noise in the world, and even in mental health and self help domains. There's a lot of frankly bad information out there, and things that inadvertently cause um, pain in this area of our lives. I don't remember the question that you asked. It was a good one.
Um, to frame it in kind of context, what we're talking about now, since there are resources out there, but it's either bad info or it's not full spectrum info. And where we're trying to offer people the full spectrum and good info, what is it that you feel these other resources are missing, or that might be make it bad info or detrimental info versus what they should know?
So, in order to understand healthy sexuality, that you've got to understand what the healthy role of sex is in that primary attachment relationship, in a marriage, in a committed relationship. And the healthy role of sex is to bind two people together. That that is so that we feel. So there's some interesting research that's been done, and there are a couple of things about we as human beings and sex that is different from all other forms of life on the earth. And those two things are, one, that sex drive, under normal conditions, sexual desire in a human is powerful and constant. Where you can look in the animal kingdom, those two things are not. Sexual desire ebbs and flows, and there's a mating season,
Mm-hmm.
and then that goes away, and but in humans, sexual desire
Mm-hmm.
is constant unless something's going on, and it's powerful unless something's going on. But that's how it's supposed to be. Sexual desire is supposed to be a powerful force that draws us to one another. Well, okay, so why is that the case? Why are we as human beings different from other forms of animal life in this regard, and why is our sexual desire constant and powerful?
Right. Instead of versus us just having a little mating season
Right, right.
and
So what do you
creating life and
think?
moving on. Probably because there's more purpose to it than just procreating.
Right,
It's multifaceted. I mean, procreation is still part of it, right?
right.
For humans and animals alike, but there's a whole nother spectrum that has to be considered
Yeah.
for us.
And that spectrum is what it does for us healthfully,
Emotionally.
emotionally. And so that's the sexual desire being constant and powerful motivates us to be together. Having a family life is difficult. Having a healthy marriage is difficult. It requires a lot of self-sacrifice. It requires a lot of communication, uh, asking for forgiveness, saying you're sorry, forgiving, trying, working. Anybody that's been in a relationship, which is most of you, know that family life is challenging. And so one of the healthy roles of sexual desire is to make us. I always am careful when I talk about this, because if I send the wrong message, it can make it sound like, well, we just want to be in a family so that we can have sex, and that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that the desire to be with someone and to be in a good spot with someone is enhanced and motivated
Mm-hmm.
by sexual desire.
And you can't take that part out. Like, you can try and ignore that sex is a part of who you are in your relationship, and that's not going to go well. And when you add that in, everything else goes so much more smoothly. And it's that connection, that feeling like you're safe and that you matter in more ways than one, not just because you're the person they call every day, because you're the person that they're intimate with
Right.
on a consistent basis.
Right.
Then everything else is just more unified too.
Yes. So let's talk about sexual desire for a little bit, because this is a tricky one for a lot of people. What How does sexual desire differ for men versus women?
That's an interesting question, particularly for me to think about, I guess, because the way I always see it portrayed is men are just always in the mood for sex. It's just a switch you turn on. And women, it's all of this work.
Right.
That's how it's often portrayed. And not that there's not some accuracy in that. But just women, it's that emotional connection first, right? That we talk about in the module anyway. And they feel emotionally connected and then want to be physically connected. And men, it's the opposite. Um, but as far as desire goes, I kind of feel like sometimes, and I don't know because I'm not every person, right? I don't know everyone else's sexual experiences, but um, I think women almost play into that a little bit. And but if they had more education on how their response system worked and how it's totally different than a man's, and how their desire is also totally natural and part of who they are and just as important, I think that would naturally just enhance the desire anyway. And so I kind of feel like women sometimes think that they are just by default the lower desire
Right. They're not
partner
supposed to want
when
it,
they
or
may not
they.
necessarily
Right.
be the lower desire partner.
Right.
Right? That's just kind of like the culture that has been created. But still, there is that difference of like emotional first and then physical,
Right.
and that's
And what she's
complicated regardless.
yeah, what she's making reference to, for those of you that might not know, is that research shows that men feel close to their wives or partner, to their wife or partner. We're not promoting polygamy by through sex. Sex leads to a man feeling close, and again, these are generalities, and we'll talk about C.O.R.E in just a second as this relates here, because this is a good one to look at. Well, for a woman, most of the time, and we'll try to put a little graph up here to see this as well, but most of the time, women want to have sex as the result of feeling close. And so men, sex leads to closeness, and for women, closeness leads to sex, which, when that's going well, really reinforces itself well.
Totally.
Because you're having sex, he feels close, he's softer, he's more in tune, he's more sensitive, which helps her feel close. She feels close, she wants to have sex, and it really helps keep that cycle going well.
Mm-hmm.
When it's not going well, it blows up just the opposite. It repels us
Where
from
to
one
even
another.
start?
Right,
Like chicken or the egg.
exactly. Because when she doesn't feel close, the last thing she wants to do is have sex. They're not having sex. He feels more disconnected. He's less in tune. He's less soft, which makes her feel more disconnected, want to have sex less, and you can really get that cycle pushing us away from each other instead of drawing us toward one another. So this is a really good example of C.O.R.E. So
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, what are you thinking?
Well, this was like this connection, this realization was huge for me because as a C, being connected is everything. And all I want to do all the time is just feel connected to my husband. He has no C in him at all, which is fine. Like I love that our
What he
differences
brings to the
temperaments.
table, yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's why I picked him. But it's that struggle of like, well, I want to feel connected to you and feel like you care about me. And the way he's going to feel connected is through intimacy.
Sexual intimacy.
Sexual intimacy specifically, yes. And once I realized that he would feel more connected to me and naturally connect with me in other ways after sex, that was a big click. And not that I needed a ton of extra motivation in that area, but it's motivating to think he'll feel connected with me through this. And then we're both winning. We're both going to be a lot happier, and it's going to start that cycle of give and take. So nice.
Yep, totally. And I like that you use the word intimacy, because all too often we refer to intimacy as just sexual intimacy. And if you really understand, intimacy means connection. It means closeness. And there are several areas of intimacy, right? You have social intimacy, you have emotional intimacy, you have cognitive intimacy, spiritual intimacy, physical intimacy, non-sexual, like hugs and kisses and those kinds of things. last night I was laying on the couch and Eric, my 9-year-old, came and climbed on top of me and just laid there. We wrestled a little bit. That's physical intimacy, right? That's
Right.
that's that, and kids need that. Teenagers need that.
Yes. Even though they think they don't.
Right. Right. I would rather have my teenagers getting some physical intimacy from me than getting physical intimacy
Right.
from other people. Um, so so you'll, just by talking about the different areas of intimacy and recognizing, again, that's another way to say what I was just saying, right? When in general, when women feel emotional intimacy, it's easier for them to want sexual
Mm-hmm.
intimacy. And when a man feels sexual intimacy or is experiencing sexual intimacy, it helps him feel greater
Mm-hmm.
emotional intimacy.
Which it's been good for my husband to realize that I'm a C and I need that, because then both of us can, like, if I'm not mentally, well, if I'm just mentally in my own head thinking all of my C thoughts, me thinking about something like sex, that's going to be a good minute. I've got to get all of the thoughts out of my brain, and so both of us
That's
can
going to be a good minute.
both of us can realize I need to talk first. Like, I definitely want to be with you. I want to spend the evening with you in whatever way. And if that leads to sex, great. But I, like, before I think about anything else, I
You
need to
need
connect
that,
with you emotionally.
right?
I need to get that response from you and feel that this part of me matters.
And
And
for
then,
most C's, verbal connection is
right,
going to help that
right.
emotional connection, right?
Yes. So that's good for me to know that I need to do that. And it's good for him to recognize she needs to emotionally connect and talk first.
Yeah, and what I want you to know more than perhaps anything else is that it is it is totally achievable and doable to have the sexual connection and the sexual domain of your relationship go well. It is not, it's not voodoo, it's not magic, it's not like just some people have it and some people
Right.
don't. It, like anything else, there are things that work and things that don't work. And if you learn what works and what it takes, and I'm not talking about techniques and vibrators and different things like that. I'm talking about relationally what it takes to have this
Mm-hmm.
domain of a relationship going well, then it's totally doable. So if you're somebody who doesn't feel like you want sex very often, or it feels like a chore, it feels like some, this can go sideways in lots of ways. Or if you're in a relationship where you feel like you're begging for sex all the time and you don't know, do I have to stand on my head for a week, or what do I have to do? Do I have to go buy a diamond or whatever? If you're, in order to get your spouse to want to have sex with you, just know that it does not have to be that way. This is actually a domain of life that you can get going really well, predictably, if you learn what to do and you employ those things,
Regardless of gender and temperament, right?
regardless of
Like, this
gender and
is,
temperament.
anybody can do this.
Yes. Yep. And I really like the point that you made, that this is, sex isn't just about men. Um, in fact, when this domain is going well, it's very common for the female to have equal or even higher sexual desire than the male does. And if that's not the case, it's usually um, because the relationship isn't going well. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So this whole emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy for the man or for the woman, sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy. Did I say that right? For the man.
Yes.
That is typically a little bit different if you're a C. So a C man, not a seaman in the Navy, but a man who is a C. So C's are motivated by what?
Comfort and connection.
C stands for comfort and connection. And C's are motivated by emotional comfort, physical comfort, sexual comfort, social comfort. The primary variable that drives the C emotionally is being and feeling emotionally settled. When a C feels unsettled emotionally, it is almost impossible for them to get their brain to disengage on whatever they feel unsettled about the brain will stop and sit and ruminate until it gets things settled. And that leads to comfort, trying to stay comfortable so that you stay settled. Avoidance of discomfort and things that you're afraid might make you feel that way. And that plays out very much in the sexual domain as well. When the C brain feels settled emotionally, the brains, whatever, the C's are much, much more able to explore other things. If you think about like having 100% of your capacity, and when you're organized emotionally, you have 100% of your cognitive capacity, emotional capacity to deal with life, to deal with parenting, to deal with going to the store, to just running life, right? When we become disorganized emotionally, a certain amount of our resources get devoted or channeled toward trying to get okay.
Yes.
And so if that's 40% of your capacity, then that leaves 60% of what you would normally have to deal with 100% of life. If 60% of your capacity is trying to get resettled, then that leaves only 40% of your capacity to deal with 100% of life. And so when a C gets unsettled emotionally, their brains get diverted trying to get that taken care of. And it's going to be difficult. It is difficult for C's in that setting or time or whatever to be interested in sex. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Say that more clearly than I did, will you?
I thought it was pretty clear. Because that's the primary focus a lot of the time for the C brain is getting settled. If they are so focused on getting settled, there's not a lot of space to work on everything else, whether that's all the things you mentioned, family or work or kids or sex. Like, because the brain is so focused over here trying to just find that homeostasis of staying comfortable.
Right. And even more so if the unsettlement has to do with your partner.
Oh yeah.
then you're going to be less likely to want to engage sexually, right?
Yes.
So a C man will typically want and need to feel connected and close before he wants to engage sexually.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That temperament factor affects it that much.
Yes, the temperament in this aspect will trump gender most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It is. You won't find very many men who are C's who function like other temperament types sexually.
Interesting.
And likewise, R's and O's will function a little bit differently than C's and E's. R and O women will function a little bit differently than C and E women. Sex for an R woman is much less complicated than it is for a C or an E woman.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
And so a lot of times an R woman, it doesn't quite trump gender. R women still will need to feel closeness, but the mental gymnastics that you talked about, like, okay, I recognize that if we have sex, he's going to feel closer to me, and that's going to, a C has to do a lot of mental gymnastics to do that. An R might think through that really quickly. He's ornery, or we're disconnected, or I'm feeling disconnected. We should probably have sex. And an R woman will function much more like what we think of men typically.
What we think of men, yeah. Interesting.
Function. So it's a very predictable. So having sex with a C is going to be very different than having sex with an O or an R or an E, because temperament, the same emotional process that drives us doesn't stop at the sex door. It permeates through that area of our lives as well. What?
I'm processing that. That's interesting.
And what are you thinking?
I might take a second
do we
to
need
filter through the whole process.
We'll come back next week and talk about it after her C brain has had time to.
Totally, yeah, at least a good week. Well, I guess I'm thinking about, when you pick your partner, unless you've done C.O.R.E and know it and are looking for temperament, you don't know someone's temperament before you marry him.
No.
And that's sometimes something that I felt a little bit guilty about. Like, he had no idea that he was getting this really emotional, worked up C that has to think through everything before she does anything, including sex.
Right.
But what's interesting.
And wouldn't it have been nice to know that?
Yeah.
I mean, you probably would have.
Hopefully, you still would have picked me.
Right. You probably would have made the same choice, but it would have been a much more educated choice.
Totally. Because there are things that after I got married, like, wow, I had no idea that this whole other part of you was such a big part of you.
Yes.
You
make sure your thing's still on. I don't know how close that is. Is the green light on?
Yeah, it's on. We're still good.
Okay.
And so I wonder too, and I hope it doesn't become like a hindrance for some people, because I think, young people, like, they're trying to find exactly what they're looking for. But thinking about how C.O.R.E affects sex as well, what kind of sexual life you're going to get for the rest of your life because of the temperament you married to. But assuming that you married someone based on the attractive factors that they have to you, that will carry over into your sex life as well, and you'll also have that same admiration and appreciation for what they bring to your sexual life as well. And frustration, right? That's all accurate then.
Yes, totally accurate.
It just carries all the way through.
Yeah, and so it's very seldom are you going to get like a totally, like, I had no idea that this was going, because the same emotional process, how they communicate, why they communicate, how open they are, how closed they are, the things that motivate them. So O's are, I can't decide whether to talk a little bit about all the different temperaments or to like really focus in on C-ness, because you're C.
I'm thinking the same thing. I don't know. Like, do you need to just get someone from each temperament?
I don't know. It might be good.
Yeah.
And I also lost my train of thought. Well, I'll just say this, and then we can come back to that. So because this is a really important point that you made. So O's are motivated by having fun and enjoying the emotional environment, and that certainly carries over into sex as well. For O's, sex isn't always some heavy encounter, right? And O's will joke sexually and have some levity and lightness, and of course that needs to be safe, because one of the reasons that makes sex such an important domain in a relationship is the power that it has to influence our feelings of mattering and safety, because of the inherent vulnerability involved in a sexual encounter. Every sexual encounter is an attachment moment. And because of the inherent vulnerability involved there, it has tremendous power to help us feel like we do matter and that we are safe. And how do we feel safe with someone? The mechanism is simple. We feel safe with someone when we risk, and when that risk is responded to well. Now, there are a lot of little sub-steps that come into play there, but that's the basic mechanism. When we're vulnerable with someone and they respond well to that vulnerability, we feel safe with them. We feel connected to them. Sex provides all kinds of great opportunities for that,
which most people don't realize, which is probably a big factor in why it feels like a constant shutdown for a lot of people.
Totally. I mean, just asking for how you want to be touched or where you want to be touched, just asking to have sex can feel super vulnerable to someone. And who initiates and who doesn't initiate really ties into communication and power and all of that kind of stuff. And ideally, you want to have balance of give and take. That's another variable that research has shown is important in helping us feel safe with somebody, is when there's balance of give and take. And so there needs to be balance of give and take in initiation as well. But back to onus. So O's sexually will be more lighthearted typically, and will want to have an element of
Spontaneous,
spontaneous.
probably.
Right. Your O's are not going to plan to have sex on next Thursday. O's are going to think, oh, hey, we've got some time right now. How about we have sex? The O brain is spontaneous and shifts gears and doesn't know how they're going to feel until they're in the moment. So if you're in a relationship with an O, and they may not feel like having sex right now, a few minutes from now that may change. Because the O brain shifts gears pretty easily. Now, if you're in a relationship with a C or an E, that's not going to change that quickly.
No.
It's the C brain and the E brain are more like an ocean liner changing directions, not a speedboat. So that's a good point. Resolution for an R. R stands for resolution, and R's are motivated by getting things done. One of the complaints that I hear a lot about people who are in sexual relationships with R's is that it can feel very task-oriented. It can feel like this is something, and especially like once a sexual encounter begins, and it gets on the radar of the R, it can be like, okay, we got to get this done, because that's how the R brain works. When something comes on their radar, the R brain wants it resolved, and so that's the default mechanism of how the R functions. And so sex can be treated the same. The default is for sex to be treated similarly, where it's what do we need to do to help you have an orgasm, or what do I need to do to get an orgasm? Right. And it can be very like check mark, task oriented kinds of things. And for an E, I'm just giving you kind of a very high level set of expectations here. But for an E, what does the E brain do?
A lot of things.
Yes, but what does E stand for?
Improving everything.
Yes, yep. E stands for exactness and excellence. The process of the E brain is looking at things to see how they could be better. Well, that doesn't stop at the sex door. and so the E brain will be looking at how to make something better. Oh, well, on a scale from 0 to 10, how was that orgasm? Well, if it was a 4, how could we make it a 5? What do we need to improve or change in order to have this? And so sometimes when you're in a sexual relationship with an E, you can feel like a project. We need the right lingerie, we need the right lighting, we need the right angle or the music or whatever. The default way that the E brain works is trying to make something better. What's the danger with that? One big danger with that, sorry. That was a leading question.
Sorry.
A big danger with that is that it can feel like it's never good enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so you've got to be careful, just like you do in all aspects of your life. You've got to make sure that you're not making your partner feel like what's going on isn't good enough just because it could be better. Should we talk about some of the unique challenges of C-ness?
Sure.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that? C-sex.
A big one for me is my total lack of O-ness ability to be in the moment. And so if I've got, even if, I'm in the mood sexually and I'm fairly present emotionally, something else crosses if something's still kind of like percolating in my brain, I can't stay in the moment. And that can throw off everything for me. Yeah. And it has driven me absolutely nuts, because I'm like, why, I know I'm enjoying this. Why is my brain not calming down? And so sometimes I have to put a lot of effort into saying, okay, all of this in my brain, it's actually not going anywhere. I don't need to sit and be thinking about it right now. I want to focus on where I'm at right now. I want to focus on being with my husband. And instead of just thinking, because it's not always important stuff that's floating through my brain.
Right. It doesn't have to be.
Right. And so it takes effort to be focused. Or like I said, if there is something that's going on in my brain that is going to get in the way, I've got to get out of the way beforehand. It can't be this quick, spontaneous thing. It's like, okay, hang on, I've got to get some things out of the way, and then I will be totally ready.
Okay, so what are some skills or tools that you found helpful in that regard? Because that's a really good point.
The biggest thing, obviously, would be communicating with my husband, telling him where I'm at, and especially over several conversations, him understanding this about me. It's a lot easier for him to be understanding, like, okay, this is,
Not about me.
this is not about, not about me. This isn't going to take forever. This isn't going to ruin our
No
whole
more.
evening. This is just like a necessary thing that needs to be done, and it's going to be better for all of us. So communication has been really big, and then also recognizing that that's just the simple recognition that that is just part of who I am. It's not a problem with my brain. It's not that I'm not enjoying sex or not enjoying what I'm doing in the moment. It's
No,
just
you don't love your husband.
right. Yeah. So those two things are probably the constants that I always have to be really aware of. And then beyond that, just being aware of where my brain is at throughout the day and doing what I need to personally to feel good, to get my brain to feel good, to settle things, so that way I'm not constantly leaving things for the end of the day and just creating this big upheaval for myself.
When do you decide when you might want to have sex or when to have sex?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a concept for that. But maybe I don't know if this is more C or E, but that combo, I can totally plan ahead. And my husband's an ER. He can also plan ahead, and that works. Like, and
Is that what you normally do?
no, we do that. We do that. I would say regularly, but not like often, and not that that's the norm go to. Um, but it is like sometimes he thought for a long time he's like, I thought you only like spontaneity. I was like, no, like I do not mind planning things out because then I can get everything out of the way
Right.
to be fully in the moment.
Right. Probably works better for you.
Yeah, but I can tell like it for me if I've got that emotional connection already going. If I'm already feeling really connected to my husband and we've had just like good conversations or good moments or like just good physical intimacy in general, I know I'm already going to easily transfer into sexual intimacy mode. And so I like to take advantage of that when I can, especially because he doesn't need as much time.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, I know that I'll be in the mindset already. That's great. And then I can be semi-spontaneous.
Right. Or the illusion of spontaneity.
Yes. It's premeditated spontaneity.
Because what you just described is not spontaneous. But it's the illusion of spontaneity.
Yes, totally.
And you're highlighting a really important point there, which is that, again, thinking about those different areas of intimacy, if you're already feeling connected spiritually, if you're already feeling connected emotionally, if those other areas of intimacy are already, you're feeling like you're on the same wavelength cognitively, parenting wise, whatever. If you're already like at a 6 or a 7 in those other areas of life, it's a very small step to go from there to sexual intimacy. But because let's just say you need to be at like an 8 or a 9 in terms of connection for the average C woman to want to have sex, to be ready to have sex. Well, it's not a very big step to go from a 7 to an 8, right?
Right.
But if you're simmering in those other areas of connection down around a 2 or a 3,
the big jump.
Trying to go from
a 2,
right? Trying to go from a 2 to an 8, is a hard thing to do.
Totally.
And that's one of the biggest things, the biggest mistakes that I see people consistently make is that surprise of like, well, why don't you want to have sex with me? Well, because you were just yelling at me, or because
right.
we haven't talked for 3 days and now you want to have sex. It's that jump. It's that jump from, but it also does go the other way, because for the man, that can be the solution. We haven't talked for 3 days, and I'm feeling, I've been home late from work, and you've been gone, and we haven't even been able to talk to each other for 3 days. We better have sex so that we can get back connected. And if you understand that, then you can healthfully manage that. If you don't, it's like, are you kidding me? And for the man, it can be like, gosh, you haven't had time for me for 3 days to even talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
And now you don't want to have sex with me when we've got a chance. And so it goes both ways in violating us feeling like we matter to one another and that we're safe with each
I've
other.
totally had that conversation.
Good.
That exact conversation where I was after I had my second baby. Well, that's a whole nother realm of dealing with sexuality, right? Is having
Yes.
kids.
And an
And
important one that we should talk about. But
yeah, and he was not understanding why. I remember him saying something like, I would say like, I'm just really stressed. Like it's just been a really long, hard day because I was also still working, and then now I had two kids, and my body felt so different. And I was like, I have too much on my mind to be in the mood for this tonight. And he's like, doesn't it help you relax? Like this helps me relax
right,
and makes my life feel less stressful. I was like, no, like
right.
I mean, yes, it does, but
But
I
getting
can't I
there,
can't jump from like
right,
having a stressful day to relaxing and having sex. Whereas that's totally his means of managing a stressful
right,
day.
right. Brings up another important point on orgasm, but I want to go back before we talk about that
Okay.
um, to what you were talking about with like being present in the moment. Um, what things like so if you're beginning a sexual encounter and you feel like something unsettled in your brain,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to derail you, um, so preparing beforehand
Right.
is a great tool for UCs. Like saying, okay, I'd like to have sex tonight, and so I want to get things settled by 8 o'clock or whatever. And so that's preventative, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
preventative preparation to get yourself into a good spot. Um, Communicating what's going on with your partner is another really effective tool. Um, when you might be starting foreplay,
Mm-hmm.
uh, or even in the middle of a sexual encounter, and your brain tries to do that, have you found things? I've got some ideas, but have you found things that are helpful to let your brain? So one of the most healthy, one of the most important things in being a healthy C, period, is learning how to make your brain change the channel when it doesn't want
Yes.
to. When a C is unsettled, the C brain does not want to change the channel. And and when you're emotionally dysregulated, especially if you're emotionally flooded and out of your window of tolerance, and you're trying to cope with something, your amygdala is the part of your brain that's in control. And you're not going to get something settled
Mm-mm.
with fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm-mm.
And so this is a dynamic that is really challenging for the C brain, because healthy is to change the channel so that you can get back up into your emotional into your upper brain, and then re-engage with the problem using your upper brain or your frontal lobes instead of your amygdala.
Right.
So that's an important skill set for a C in general, is when your brain doesn't feel settled and you know you need to change the channel so that you can get back online, and your brain is fighting that.
So is that you going back to your question
Yeah.
of which I want to make sure I understand the question because you didn't quite finish it. Like
Yeah. Sorry.
in the middle of a sexual encounter and my brain starts to float away, what do I do?
Yeah. Are there things that you found effective to help get you back?
Totally. There's definitely times I've failed bad, really bad, and then it ruins everything, and
Right.
it's awful.
Because of the vulnerability of a sexual encounter.
Right. And so, and like if I'm not there, and he's really big on like if you're not enjoying it, I'm not enjoying it. This is a moot point for both of us, and so I just will obliterate it
And in his our
unintentionally.
brain, he wants to get onto something
Right.
that he can do something about.
So being really aware of that and getting really sick of that, I and it depends on the situation, right? Like if there's something really serious that I didn't address in my brain, I'm trying to engage sexually, and it's not like I'm too emotionally wound up. It is worth it to like pause and address it, but that doesn't happen near as often as my brain just picking like a random floating thought that I thought about all day already.
Right.
And so one of the things that I found, I don't know how odd this is, but like I was saying, I really struggle staying in the moment. But I know one for a fact that I love connecting with my husband in any way. And two, physical touch is one of my love languages up there for me. Like it's something I really enjoy and makes me feel connected.
Makes you feel loved.
Yeah, totally. Like I feel like it's I mean, I guess you got to be careful saying this, but I feel like it's it's hard to fake genuine physical touch. Like you cannot give someone a hug and pretend like you mean it and them not feel it. You know what I mean? So like, I love that
That's a C
genuineness.
variable.
Like, when you like make your kids give like a sorry hug and it's just
Right.
this like really
Right.
pathetic look. Anyway, so it feels really genuine to me. So those are winning points for me. And so I want to be in the moment. And so something that I found helps for me to keep me in the moment is I will narrate like what we're doing. And then it brings me
Good.
back in
Yes.
focus, like, and then reminds me like, oh, this is totally what I don't want to be thinking about this. I want to
Right.
enjoy this moment because it's all of the things I love at the same time.
So what that tool is was that you?
Yeah, it's over there.
Okay. What that tool is bringing awareness to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So adding the auditory component of speaking or narrating.
Yeah, mentally, usually, like
Okay.
to
So
myself.
so that's another thing too. You can do that mentally, just internally. You could also, if you wanted to up the vulnerability of it,
Oh, that would up the
you could
vulnerability.
also do that verbally, which would um, definitely work to bring your brain present,
Totally.
and it would make the encounter more vulnerable.
Yes.
But that tool is a really good tool. So, and this is there's so many different little side notes, but you can do, like, if you're having a hard time being present, not sexually, but just in general, you can do things like hold an ice cube and just pay attention to how that feels in your hand. You can like put pressure on, or you can like, man, you can like squeeze someone's hand and just like focus on where you're feeling that pressure, or what it feels like to have that. Like Andresa's hand right now feels warm. It feels warm, and I can feel my pinky's getting squeezed a little bit, and I can feel her thumb squeezing my
Mm-hmm.
my pointer knuckle or whatever that is. And so just by focusing on those things, it brings the brain present to what's going on. And so that's a really good technique to use, and to bring your brain present. You can say, okay, yeah, I'm that tickles, or I feel the pressure here,
Mm-hmm.
or I whatever it, you might feel someone's hair brushing your face, or just different things to focus on, like on the physical sensations that are going on, and your brain will follow.
Totally.
One of the great things about the human brain is that it will go where we direct it, if we will direct it. If we don't direct it, it will go wherever it wants to go. But the cool thing about the brain is that it will follow if we will lead.
Is that harder or easier for different temperaments?
Absolutely.
Because that's a lot of work for me, and so, and I just assume it's a lot of work for everybody, but probably isn't.
Not as much. Your awareness of that is greater because of your C-ness, even greater because of your CE-ness. C's and E's are much more internal processors than O's and R's are,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's
Mm-hmm.
just not as much even awareness or processing. Another tool that can be used is you can keep a piece of paper and a pencil or pen or whatever, or your phone. I forget that
Phones
most
are a thing.
I forget that most people
That's what they
just
have.
take notes on their phone. But you can keep something like that by your bed, and if you're having a hard time getting your brain to shift gears, if you write down what you're worried about, it gives your brain permission to let it go. Because part of why our brains don't let go of things is because there's this fear that if I don't keep this in my thought,
Mm-hmm.
then I don't know when the turntable is going to come back around.
Totally.
Right? I don't know when I'm going to do
Yes.
that, and I don't. And this is an important thought, and I don't want to lose it. And so your brain is trying to keep a hold of it as a coping mechanism. And so by writing it down, it gives your brain permission to say, okay, that's not going to be lost. I can come back to where I am.
In the middle of your sexual encounter, like pausing and like, I gotta write this down real quick. Interesting.
Better than disconnecting.
Totally better than
right? And so
watching the whole thing.
Right. And ideally, you want to have 3 or 4 or 5 tools to help you be able to do that. I want to talk about one more thing and then we'll stop. I don't know how much time you want to take, but
I don't know what time it is.
it is probably it's 2:30,
Okay.
almost 2:30.
Okay, we're good.
Orgasm is important. Um, and it's important for a couple of different things, for many different things. Orgasm is actually good for our health. Not that you want that to be the main reason why you're having orgasms, but there are a lot of chemicals that are released when we have an orgasm. Lots of serotonin and dopamine, and if you're having intimate sex, oxytocin, and there's a lot of good things that happen physiologically to us when we have an orgasm. And so it's also common for people to think that for people to get in the habit of not prioritizing orgasm, especially women. Um, it is fairly uncommon for a man to have sex without an orgasm, but a fairly large percentage of women report never having orgasms.
Yeah.
And it's easier. A woman can have sex without having an orgasm. And so it's easy for a woman to get in the habit of not prioritizing that. And I would just caution against that. Again, you don't want the goal or the objective to be getting off. Then you miss the healthy benefit of connection that healthy sexuality has to bind the two of you together. And when the focus becomes too much on getting off, then the emotional connection usually suffers, and the intent of that connection typically suffers. But when you have an orgasm with somebody, it also ups the vulnerability. And if you're having intimate sex, which is a whole other conversation, then oxytocin is the main hormone that is released. And oxytocin is also referred to as the love hormone or the cuddle hormone. When you're having what I refer to as dopamine sex, or when the goal is just physical gratification, the main chemical in our bodies is dopamine. And dopamine is different than oxytocin. Dopamine it creates desire for whatever produced that dopamine hit. And dopamine, again, we can talk about this another time. There's a whole process that occurs with dopamine receptors and stuff, but it takes, because of how the brain treats dopamine, it takes increased stimulus to get the same dopamine payoff. I'll just tell you real quick. So our brains try, and Andresa kind of made reference to this, our brains try really hard to maintain a homeostatic balance. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
You get uncomfortable?
Yeah. It's okay. It's part of this game at this point.
Part of these last few months, yes. Right? You need a pillow or anything?
No, okay. Okay.
So when we do something that produces a dopamine hit, this process plays out in addiction all the time. When you do something that gives you a dopamine hit, it floods the system with dopamine, which simultaneously feels really good and sends off alarms because the system feels overwhelmed. And the brain responds to that by shutting down dopamine receptors, trying to maintain a normal homeostatic balance in the brain. Well, so then with fewer receptors, say you start with 100, and this is on the billions, but if you start with 100 and you flood the system, your brain shuts down 10 of those dopamine receptors. Well, now you have 90. And so then to get the same high, you have to do more of the stimulus to get the same high with 90 dopamine receptors. Well, if you manage to do that, then the brain might shut down another 10. Well, now you have 80. And so then it takes more of the stimulus to get the same high. because now you have fewer dopamine receptors going on. And so the nimbus accumbens, which is the part of the brain that doles out dopamine, doesn't function well when this dynamic plays out. And many of you may have experienced this in your sex life, when the goal and the objective is to try to not be emotionally vulnerable, and so we're just going to really focus on how much of a sexual payoff we can get. When the goal and the objective is to get off, then it requires increased toys and stimulus and outfits and positions and all of these things to try to keep things fresh, is what they talk about. Trying to keep things fresh and exciting. Oxytocin sex isn't like that. Oxytocin feels good. It feels as good the first time as it does the 937th time. Oxytocin feels awesome every single time. Feels just as good. And so when you're having intimate sex, when you're vulnerable, when you're connected, when there's emotional intimacy and all the other areas of intimacy as well, then oxytocin is the main hormone that is released upon orgasm, and that binds us together. When you experience a powerful emotional moment with somebody, it binds you to that moment. And it works with soldiers in war, and when you go on a roller coaster or different things. When we experience intense emotion with somebody, it binds us to that person. When you have a really good talk with somebody, you feel closer to that because you had this emotional moment with somebody. The chemicals that are released upon an orgasm increase that emotional moment much more than when you don't have an orgasm. And so it has more binding power when that takes place. That took me a really long time to say all that. Sorry.
It's a lot of info.
Well, and my brain always swirls down different things, and I try to paint the whole picture when,
But by not prioritizing that, you're missing out on this whole level. Is maybe not the best word, but kind of this whole level of intimacy in many ways with your spouse that you could be having.
Totally. And it's not about missing out on getting off.
Yeah.
It's missing out on intimacy and connection. And that feels really good every time. So anyway, I hope that some of this conversation has been beneficial. We'll be back on track with our podcast and try to get some good resources out there for you. Closing thoughts?
No.
Shocking. Okay, thank you so much.